Well, joining me now with more on the ins and outs of all that's happening with Congress is Ginger Gibson. She's a political correspondent with Reuters. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So as we take a look at the diversity of this incoming class of lawmakers, what do you think this tells us about the sort of leadership that Americans are looking for?
This was a real response to Donald Trump and the first 2 years of the Trump administration. Voters overwhelmingly said they wanted something different. They wanted a younger representative. They wanted women. They wanted people of color representing them in Washington. We saw this among women voters, among suburban voters, among college-educated voters who really said they are not happy with how things are right now.
So then how likely are we going to see this sort of inclusivity in the actual policies that may come out of this Congress?
It's going to be very hard for this House to get any policies accomplished. That's because they still have to get any legislation through the Republican-controlled Senate, and that's going to be very difficult. They're going to act as they like to call themselves, the resistance, though, a stopgap keeping a check on President Trump.
So then how can Democrats capitalize on this majority in the House?
Democrats are going to be able to use this majority in a couple of ways. First is trying to message to the American public what Democrats mean and what they stand for ahead of the 2020 presidential election, when Donald Trump will stand for re-election. But they're also going to be able to act as a force against the president on policy. At this point, his policy agenda is all but stopped. And on things like the wall and the government shutdown, he's now going to have to negotiate with Nancy Pelosi, who is a force to be reckoned with.
Now, this certainly is a historical moment, not just in terms of the class that's coming in, but having this new class come in against the backdrop of a government shutdown. Is there going to be any sort of impact with this new class and this government shutdown?
We know, and sources tell us, that President Trump thought he was going to get into a better negotiating situation once Pelosi took office, but that seems very unlikely. She's one of the best vote whips to have worked in Congress in decades, probably since Lyndon Baines Johnson. So he's got a real fight on his hands when they meet on Friday morning. This is going to be the first order of business for both sides to try to get done.
And as you mentioned, Nancy Pelosi, obviously she made history not just by becoming the first woman to become the Speaker of the House, the first and only, but also the first repeat of this as well. So what do you think she's going to bring to the table this time around?
Nancy Pelosi is one of the fiercest negotiators, and as she showed today in the resounding support of her caucus, the ability to bring people together. She's going to be negotiating anything that Trump wants, and it's going to be very difficult for him. She's never lost a legislative battle, and it would be surprising to see her lose her first one back in charge.
Now, it's interesting because we do have all these new voices coming in. You have sort of not just this concern about what the new voices will mean in terms of the split in Congress, but within the parties themselves. How do you see that either helping or hurting the ability for Congress to get things done? There's
been a lot of speculation about the divisions within the Democratic Party with these new young liberal members, Alexandria or Ocasio-Cortez, some of the other more liberal members. But it's important to remember that Democrats really aren't divided on policy. Nancy Pelosi and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez agree on climate change. They agree on government funding. They agree on taxes. It's really a tactical division between Democrats. So where Republicans had lots of ideological and philosophical divisions, Democrats aren't going to have that as they take over.
Now, obviously, we know that Donald Trump likes to think of himself as a deal maker, as a negotiator. How much tougher is it going to be to get through a lot of these policies like infrastructure, still questions on immigration, healthcare? How much more difficult is this going to be now?
It's going to be near impossible to get anything through this Congress, particularly in the next 2 years. Democrats hoping to just hold the line for 2 years and try to win the next presidential election. And they're still sore about how they thought Republicans mistreated Barack Obama, that they weren't willing to come together on anything. They agreed with him. So they're not going to give their president anything that he wants.
So then, looking ahead, what can we expect from this Congress?
Not much. We can expect a lot more gridlock, a lot more logjams in Washington. We should expect them to reopen the government sometime, maybe even in the next week or sooner. But in terms of big legislative accomplishments, they could try to get infrastructure done. They could try to address the soaring cost of pharmaceuticals, but it's going to be really difficult for any of that to get done.
And any fresh faces that we should really be keeping an eye on?
There are a number of fresh faces. Women, as you said, 100 women have been elected to the U.S. House. Overwhelmingly, the majority of them are Democrats. And there are going to be several trying to emerge in a way to stand out in the fight against Trump, in the fight against Republicans. There will be several trying to take the mantle. I would be watching for those young women who have moved into the Omar, one of the first Muslim women elected to the United States Congress, Ocasio-Cortez, who has already emerged as a leader. There's a number of those who will be doing that.
All right, exciting stuff. Thank you. Very good to have you on. Ginger Gibson there, political correspondent for Reuters.